Well, Jen Gerson, that's quite the wild name you have there.
Yeah, I was letting my hair reflect my inner state. I just had quite the adventure at the bank with two children. This was not a good idea.
No, and it's funny because once upon a time, my grandmother, way back in the day, I mean, obviously she's dead now, so a while ago, she was a bank teller, and
Hmm.
that was sort of like her career before she did what people did in the 1940s, which was get married and then never work again. If you're
Hmm.
so her like early 20 job was bank teller, and then eventually senior bank teller. And it just like you walk into a bank in Toronto, especially like an older building, you've got nothing but like little windows and or tills, or I guess for bank tellers, and there's like one guy on duty. So you have these big branches with one person on duty. So you ran into a lineup in the bank as well because there were no people there. Do we want to just jump right into it?
Let's jump right into it. We do not need to tell the story about how my son, smashed my daughter into the glass sliding door of the bank teller's office. That's fine. We can just skip that.
Accidentally, though, I want to stress. I feel like I should come to his defense.
Kinda.
Uh,
Yeah,
okay.
like let's just say I did not win Mom of the Year award today. Anyway.
Well, that's okay. They'll just add a small bank fee to your account to compensate for that. So last week, and this was not planned, our dispatch last week was really hard on the federal liberals. And I'm not apologetic for it because they deserve it. But
No, we just didn't even mean to do it. It just
yeah.
happened. We're
So
just like,
like
wait a minute. All of our
excuse me.
dispatches are mean to the liberals.
So yeah, I mean, I ended up writing 2 blurbs on federal politics. You wrote a couple blurbs on federal politics. We sent a note out to our usual contributors and said, "Hey, who wants to contribute?" And we got some that were about federal politics. And it was not a plan. And we kind of decided we were going to do the opposite this week, where we're going to ignore as much of the federal stuff as possible and focus more on some other issues.
Spoiler
And
alert, we kind of failed.
yeah, we failed. I do have some provincial stuff I'm going to talk with you about and give you an update on, and I know you have some Alberta stuff
I've
you want
got
to
some
update me
provincial
on.
stuff to talk about. Absolutely.
But let me start with a federal thing. So Aaron Wary, CBC, wrote a long essay this week. It's interesting, and I don't say interesting to damn with faint praise. I mean that in a very literally. It's interesting. I would recommend everybody read it, and I think it's interesting on a couple of levels. Um, Kind of plucking out of it like one insight to share or comment on is not, it's kind of futile. Like it's too long and deep a piece to kind of do that. But I am going to make one exception because something jumped out at me that I think is fantastic. And have you read Paul Wells' latest? Just came out a
No,
few hours ago.
no, I've been busy.
Oh, you've been okay. Right. My mistake. Pardon me. So, do you remember a few months ago, or maybe it wasn't even that long, Mary Ng and Amanda Alvaro had that a conflict of interest because Minister Ng's
Hmm.
office had been giving contracts to Amanda Alvaro's company, pomp and circumstance, and it was found by was Integrity Commissioner or Conflict of Interest Commissioner? I don't recall which.
Yeah, I one of those types of
I,
people.
I don't recall what the title was, but basically because of a personal relationship, a friendship between Minister Ng and Amanda Alvaro, that the payment should not have happened. So Paul Wells was telling us this week about another one that's come out like that within Ahmed Hussein's office, and there's been I mean, I just kind of honestly love you, Paul. I just skim read this one just because it landed just as we were about to record this. But basically, it was someone who's on the a relative of someone who's on his staff was billing the office for communications training, and Paul made the point. These guys always get themselves in trouble with communications, and it's sort of on a meta, but also a micro level, right? Like all these troublesome contracts are going to communication firms.
Also,
What's
can we
the
just point out, like, because firstly, communications training is a grift.
uh
Sorry, did I say that out loud?
no,
And
you well,
therefore
if you
destroy all of my future contracts?
it's not
All
a grift.
my retirement, my retirement plans are
It's a
now.
grift unless done with professionals like Matt Gurney and Jen Gerson. um no, but the meta side of of talking about communications for the Liberals is that what is our primary criticism of the Liberals? We talked about this in the last dispatch. There's the fuck Trudeau criticisms that we dismiss, but then there's the deliverology criticisms that we think are bang on. And the opposite of deliverology is comms.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what Paul was summing up in his piece. And there's this really interesting insight in the Aaron Wary piece at the CBC, which again, I recommend it. It's interesting. Really jumped out at me. And I'm a weirdo this way. Like every journalist is a weirdo in this way. You'll read thousands and thousands and thousands of words, but 3 sentences, like, whoa, and they jump out at you. He's talking with a senior unidentified Liberal. You know the kind, the sources close to the prime minister, blah, blah, blah. And the senior unidentified Liberal who was granted permission to speak anonymously to CBC News to protect his identity and allow candid comment, which is fine. I get it. We all play by these rules. Made a really interesting comment about how the Liberals, I mean, the polls are bad. The prime minister is unpopular. Like this is a challenging time for the government. And he made a really interesting comment that about a year ago, spring of last year, early 2020, how they weren't talking about the right things, because they'd been knocked off track by COVID, the convoy, the invasion of Europe, the inflation and economic problems.
Like
and that
the news.
Yeah, well, they weren't on their message, right?
Right. Because the news happened.
Yeah. And that's what jumped out at me. No, guys, you were talking about the right things because you were talking about reality.
What was happening? Yeah, the world around you.
And I understand that you were not talking about the things you wanted to be talking about, but what that tells you is that at a fundamental level, our federal government didn't want to be talking about reality. And
no, they wanted to be crafting their own reality because perceptions management is what they do.
And I always know I sound like I'm being petulant when I say this. They're very good at it.
Yes, of course they are.
And this is the thing that people I don't think always appreciate. They're great at what they're doing. What they're doing just doesn't help you and I. Now, if you and I did have a communications firm and we were billing all the ministers, hey, maybe it would. But for the record, we don't. The gap between a communications-based leadership and a deliverology, like actual policy implementation and execution-based leadership policy, is enormous, because a very successful communication-based political strategy will get you elected. A focus on a deliverology and an effective one strategy will get shit done. And, this unnamed senior Liberal is telling Aaron Wary, oh, yeah, we weren't talking about the right things last year because we were elected in 2015 to talk about jobs for the middle class and improving economic opportunity for Canadians. Yeah, no, that's true. And then a fucking plague happened and a war. And we're, for the first time in decades, we're thinking about nuclear attack. And it's like, guys, I am sorry that macroaggressions have intruded in a way that is knocking our attention off microaggressions. It sucks. I liked it more before we were worried about dying of a mutated plague or getting nuked or having inflation too. That was great. But when a government is forced by reality to grapple with reality instead of its agenda, that's not a problem. It's why we have governments.
It's what you're here for. That's your job. Do your job.
And I think to the extent that I can charitably broaden this out so that I'm not just picking on the Liberals here, I actually think, and I wrote about this a lot during the pandemic, because I did a ton of pandemic writing in Ontario, a lot of it for TVO, so my own home province, right? The pandemic was big and complicated. I tried to focus on my own home province. One of the issues that kept jumping out at me was how unprepared everybody was. And I just don't mean we didn't have enough PPE. Justin Trudeau, until probably February of 2020, had probably not spent a lot of time thinking about a plague. Ditto Doug Ford, ditto John Tory. And I think as we sort of looked across our society, we began to kind of realize there are a few people in positions of power who are relatively prepared for this, mentally and in terms of their education, but not many. And I think that's just such an interesting meta comment. None of our governments are built for crisis. Like the entire operating assumption, and
Yeah.
I write about this when I
Is
say that expectations are a problem, is that the purpose of government is overseeing and occasionally redistributing a functional, healthy, prosperous, stable society.
Yeah.
But then when history throws a curveball at us,
bloop, 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 bloop.
their expectations are a problem. They haven't
Right.
thought about it. And
Right.
did I ever tell you my weird little meta theory that I should turn into a column eventually?
Sure.
You want to know one of the most interesting dividing lines between people who adapted well mentally and people who didn't?
People who took up sewing.
Uh, no comment. My keen communications brain is telling me not to comment on that. I noticed very early in the pandemic, it wasn't political affiliation. And I just remember like there were so many clued out dippers, so many clued out grits, and so many clued out Tories, but there were also some really smart dippers and grits and Tories. And I realized not 100% of the time, science fiction fans, I thought in my own private conversations, had a better time kind of going, okay, well, a month ago we didn't live in this world, but now we do.
Mm.
And I wonder if it's because nerds like me spend a lot of time thinking about different scenarios.
Can I point out that I'm a science fiction fan, and does that throw a curveball in your theory?
No, because I think even though you got stressed out, you also didn't have a prolonged denial phase.
No, I don't think I did. No.
Like
I remember in the early days of the pandemic, I was calling you being like, all right, do I need to be growing my own food? Like I went full on
you adapted.
adapt. Yeah.
Like
Adapt or die.
you saw what was coming and drew the conclusions. You never had a risk to Canada's low phase. What you had was a little bit of contrarian, oh, the news is very worried about this, so therefore it's probably fine. And meanwhile, by this point, I was like polishing my rifles. And then like
I didn't know. Early on the pandemic, I went full into
before. Like because like when it was still, will it come here? Will it won't?
Oh no,
I was more worried than you were.
I can't remember this exactly, but I do remember like fairly early by March of 2020, I was like, do I need to start stockpiling food and growing my own shit? I went into full darkness.
I went to yellow alert in January, and by February I'd already done all my shopping. And
yes, that makes sense. Okay.
Anyway, so the other thing I would just mention, because I'm talking about this Aaron Wary piece again, I strongly recommend it. It's a really interesting article in a lot of ways, and I think it's layered. Like one of the questions I would have, if you're the CBC, if you're the CBC, I think you might want to be thinking about running long profiles of the Liberals. And I know that kind of clashes a little bit with their mandate. Like I'm not telling them not to report the news, because obviously they should. But if Pierre Poilievre is the next prime minister, Exhibit A and why he's going to defund the CBC is going to be a feature like this.
Well, I'd like to make a one point on that one.
Yeah.
And that is, I think it's easy for people to be critical of what are called friendly journalists, or how else do you describe this? They're journalists who are, access journalists is another sort of pejorative term. They're people who usually the government in power, provincial, federal, whatever, knows that they can turn to for a sympathetic ear, right?
Yep.
And certain journalists have been criticized for being that at various points of time, and I've always thought that was a bit of an unfair thing, because
I agree.
Bluntly, I think that journalism is an ecosystem. We all don't do exactly the same thing. There's room in that ecosystem for friendly journalists, not partisan journalists, but journalists who are friendly to certain partisan interests, because you can get information out to the general public that way that would never otherwise come out.
It's the communications problem, right? If not for friendly journalists, we would have no insight into the government.
Exactly. So like, look, they're chatting with Aaron Wary. Cool. They're chatting with somebody, and they're putting stuff out there into the general conversation that is giving us insight. It may not be positive insight, and it may not be the insight they're intending to give us, but they're still providing some valuable conversation, some meat for the fodder, so some fodder for the grist for the mill. There you go. That's what I'm looking for. So like I think that there's a role for that kind of journalism, and I don't disparage it. I just think there's different niches, there's different roles in the ecosystem for this. So I give this particular profile due props. I mean, obviously it's also a lot of work, right? I mean, it's a lot of work to put these things
It's worth
together.
reading. It's very interesting. And I hope I didn't sound like I was criticizing Aaron directly, because I'm not. Like I'm telling everybody to read his piece. I can just see for the CBC, they're going to have a hard time covering the upcoming election if one of the key issues is, do we keep the CBC?
Well, the other
I
interesting
just
question
don't know
is,
how they do that.
do they do a comparably favorable or a comparably friendly interview or profile that's 5,000 words long with each of the other leaders, right? I mean, that's the other interesting question.
I don't think the Conservatives would talk to them.
Well, that becomes the issue.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
I'm starting to see Poilievre pop up a little bit in the media, which I interpret with, I have no inside knowledge on this, but I interpret this as maybe a little bit of an emerging media strategy. But we'll see. One more thing to mention on the Wary piece before I move on. I won't bog this down any further, because I know you've got some federal stuff you want to talk about as well. One of the things that Aaron has consistently been great on, and I think he remembers something that is forgotten a lot, is that one of the biggest public policy wins the Liberals have that has been almost unfairly forgotten is the reforms they did early in their first majority mandate on childcare payments. Okay. Because like that was taking a good political idea the Conservatives had and actually converting it into a good public policy idea. And it's kind of been weird to me how little praise they get for actually doing a good job on that. And he does have a piece in the article, and I don't recall, because I didn't make a note of this, I don't recall if it's his narrative text or if he's quoting or paraphrasing someone else, but there is a couple of paragraphs where he sort of ticks off what the genuine accomplishments of the Trudeau era Liberals have been, and it is a more impressive list. Like, it's interesting because you can really read it either way. I think for critics of the Trudeau government, it is probably a more impressive list than you want to admit. There's probably more there than you want to admit. If you are a champion of the Trudeau government, you probably don't want people to notice that 80% of that list was all done 6 years ago. And it just struck me as like kind of one of these really interesting things. So all like cannabis legalization, childcare, reforming NAFTA, actually kind of like surviving that, like how challenging that was,
process,
right? Like there are genuine accomplishments that the Liberals do have, but if you kind of break their time in office in half, just to keep things simple, right? They've been around over 7 years now. We're into their 8th year. So let's just be sloppy and go the first 4 years, we'll treat the majority term as one thing and we'll treat everything after it as something else. I get that it's harder to get stuff done in a minority, but oh my God.
Well, and also the question is, even if they had a majority, what would they be doing? What's the vision? What's the like, you know what I mean?
I mean, well, you know what? I'm going to hand this over to you now. I've talked enough for a little bit. Let's talk about that, because that's a really interesting issue. Tell me about the plaque.
So this one got flagged for me, and I went a little apoplectic, and I'm almost going to keep my powder dry for when I'm writing here. But I'm going to read this thing from ctvnews.ca. Global Affairs Canada plans to install a plaque commemorating Canada's evacuation of Afghans and embassy staff when its capital, Kabul, fell to the Taliban. The plaque carried a $10,000 price tag and was approved in a July 2022 memorandum that the Canadian Press obtained through an access to information request. Thank God. God bless you, Canadian Press. It reads in part, this plaque pays tribute to all the Government of Canada employees who contribute to this heroic effort. Matt, you had a really good phrase when we were talking about this before we started the thing, but this is literally a monument to failure.
Yeah.
It's literally a monument to failure. Now, we covered this quite extensively when one of our friends, Kevin Newman, covered what was actually going on the ground.
Yeah.
You know, the government employees and embassy staff got out fairly early and then left a lot of longtime employees and interpreters who worked with the Canadian Armed Forces during the War on Terror behind and fucked with them for several weeks. So
before abandoning them to their deaths.
Before abandoning them to their deaths. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as the Taliban swept through. So like I don't even know where to begin by thinking that that was a thing you wanted to commemorate. Like how accustomed are we in Canada to such a degree of complacency, such a degree of mediocrity, that you look at the evacuation out of Afghanistan a year ago and think that deserves a plaque for our heroic efforts. We tried. No, it kind of reminds me, you know what it reminds me of? A couple of years ago, back when I was at the Post, I think Chris Selly and I were making fun of CBC comedy.
Oh yes. Oh, I
And one
did.
of the,
I
and
was part. I know what you're talking about, and I was I your boss at the time?
you probably were.
Because
Yeah.
I remember the angry emails.
Yep. And we got an angry DM from like a producer at CBC Comedy that was like, basically, could you please stop being mean to us? A lot of people are trying really hard. We're trying. And to me, that's just like, that summed up the Canadian spirit, and that summed up Canadian mediocrity to a T. Like, it's not very good, but don't we get points for effort? Can't you see how hard we're trying? And the answer is no. You don't get points for effort. No one gets, there are no points awarded for effort. None. Zero. Zip.
I know
Out of the office.
You one of the only faults you have, you 99.9% excellence is Jen Gerson. One fault you have is you're not a hockey fan. See, right now, for the video watchers out there, I've got my Maple Leafs retro sweatshirt on. A couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, you might have heard of this because it was such a humiliating embarrassment. It was a really weird hockey game, one of the weirdest hockey games, and actually, I was so lucky to be there. I watch almost every Leaf game on TV, but I actually happened to be at this game where both Leaf goalies got injured. And one of our goalies got injured. Both opposing goalies got injured. And this is deep hockey minutia for you. The home team always has in the building what's known as the emergency goalie. So it's someone who's not an NHL caliber goalie. It could be someone from the local university team or someone from the minors. And in the event that the other team loses their goalie, the home team is required to have somebody in the building who can go on the ice, put on the equipment, and play goalie for the other team so that the game can continue. So when the Carolina Hurricanes had both of their goalies injured, and our emergency goalie, the one paid to be there by the Toronto Maple Leafs organization, signs an emergency one-night contract with the Carolina Hurricanes. They in a hurry get him a uniform made, like they can do this on site, and his name's David Ayres, and he was one of our Zamboni drivers, and he works with the Maple Leafs as like one of the extra bodies at practices, being a goalie, so that the players can like take shots, and he beat us.
It's amazing.
So like I was watching, so I'm there with my son, and it was one of the most pathetic performances I've ever seen in any sporting organization, but I was so incredibly honored to be part of it. And the Carolina Hurricanes immediately had David Ayres merchandise available. And my dad bought me one, bought my son one, bought himself one, bought my brother-in-law one. So we all ended up with David Ayres Carolina Hurricanes like merchandise because it was a monument to failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
this is by the way,
we were doing it ironically. The Canadian government's not.
No, they're not doing it ironically. I mean, this is honestly why the Maple Leafs are Canada's team and always will be.
Go Leafs, go.
Anyway, I'm laughing, but I'm genuinely quite horrified. I'm dying inside. This is sometimes this fucking country. I can't even.
Have you ever seen a failure so spectacular you feel privileged for being part of it?
I think I'd have to think about it, but I think I have.
Yeah,
I have to think about it though.
That was me watching the Maple Leafs last night, and it's actually not a bad metaphor for a lot of Canadian governance since. It's funny also this week, and I blame my sister for this. My sister sent me down a rabbit hole on YouTube of a just a series of really interesting videos, which then sent me in turn down another rabbit hole. I've been doing like a deep dive on the Titanic this week.
Mm,
Fascinating history, right?
yeah.
When
Have
you
you read Max Miller's Tasting History? He has a whole series about like the
that
food
is
eaten.
what my sister sent me down.
There you go.
And I watched all of Max Miller's episodes of the menu that was being served on the Titanic.
Yeah,
And
he's
then I
great.
began, yeah, no, it's fantastic. So shout out Max Miller. And then I began watching other Titanic things. And I kind of got reminded of how there was controversy at the time because it was supposed to be women and children first, but
Mhm.
some very wealthy men survived, right? Because some of them read the writing on the listing hull and got onto a lifeboat. Some of them were pulled out of the water, but there was almost a stigma to have survived if you were a
Right.
man.
Yeah.
And it was a humiliation because you got yourself out instead of the women and
Yeah, you took
children.
up one of the limited life rafts that otherwise would have gone to a woman or child.
The Canadian government would have given them all medals.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Because congratulations, embassy staff. We have gotten you out of danger. What about everyone else?
Yeah, we got you out of danger back when it wasn't actually that hard to do, by the way, before the Taliban rolled in. Oh, and like, just to remind everybody, the issue of like left behind interpreters and things had been a simmering problem for years.
Oh
and
my
had
God, yes.
literally
Yeah,
years had been brought up, and one of the major problems was the level of paperwork required to get these people visas was involved like biometrics that they couldn't possibly get in Kabul. Like it was actually Kafkaesque. Like it was unbelievable. So anyway, plaque.
His name's Max Miller.
Max Miller, Tasting History.
Tasting History. It's a historian on YouTube who recreates food items from historical periods. I love this guy. Absolutely fascinating. I also want to make some of his recipes.
Yes.
Like I want to make third-class Titanic passenger rice soup.
Which actually looked really good.
It did look good.
Yeah.
You on the federal front, before we go and pee on the provinces, you had one other thing. I wish we could play copyrighted content. We can't. The YouTube algorithms would hate that. But I just want the listeners to know, and I want the viewers to know, Rocket Man, Elton John.
Rocket Man.
Burning
Can I sing? Wait, can I
on...
sing? Can I sing copyrighted content? Because then it's original, right?
I think you can sing copyrighted content.
Rocket
I don't know if I recommend. I've never heard you sing, so I don't know if I'm recommending it, but I think it's allowed.
Anyway,
Mars ain't the kind of place to raise your kid.
Saw this thing from Rachel Gilmore, Omar Al-Garaba. Transportation Minister just announced a plan to enable Canada to do space launches from within its own borders. Quote, for many years, Canadian satellites have launched from sites in other countries, he said. It's time for us to start launching them right here at home. I agree. It would be really good if we had more of our own satellite launch pads. Looking forward to it. If we could build them. We're going to build them? We actually going to build them? I don't have faith that we can actually build things. But I'm interested.
Yeah. So I'm the space nerd. I'm the space nerd. Normally, you want to be launching as close to the equator as possible, and you launch opposite the direction of the Earth's rotation. So you sort of like the Earth rotates quickly, and you get the benefit of the extra speed based on the Earth's rotation.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, you want to be shooting for polar orbits. Canada's well positioned for that because instead of shooting to the east, I think the way they shoot off Florida or at a Kazakhstan where the Russians launch, we would just shoot north, and then we could get into a polar orbit, which suits us. Canada is a completely well-suited country to this. We're high tech, stable regulatory systems, and favorable geography. You also always want to be firing either near wide open expanses or huge open bodies of water,
of which we have lots.
Basically in case kaboom.
Right.
So like Florida is perfect for launching because it's close to the equator and you just fire it over the ocean. Something terrible happens, you don't kill anybody on the ground. I'm with you though. I don't know if we can pull this off. It's just like I don't hate the idea. You know what this is, Jen? This is your column on Thursday about public health messaging. It's not that I hate the idea. I just have questions. I have doubts. So I haven't been able to write a column about this yet, but I've been working on this quietly, and it will be for us. about the Via Rail debacle over Christmas, right?
Right.
Via Rail, transportation, federally regulated. We
Trains
stranded hundreds of people within
for
like
18
walking
hours.
distance of rescue.
Yep.
We're not going to fix that. But what
Right.
we are going to do is develop a homegrown Canadian space launch industry
Sure. By the way, can I point out that like we've had train technology
for 200 years.
200 years. Going on 200 years.
Choo-choo.
My son's really into trains. Can tell you
I
all
love
about
trains. Everybody
Ah,
loves trains.
it. Everybody loves trains.
It's just like the
I
Canadian
just don't want to be
government
stuck on one for 18 hours with no working toilets or food
within walking distance.
within walking distance. I mean, how in the world did they just not get off the like? You couldn't have kept me on that train. No way.
Probably not me either. It was
I
about
would have
8
rushed. I would have rushed the security. I would have been like, no.
I don't know if there was security. Like, I don't know if they were telling people not to. Look, if you have young kids, if you are mobility issues, I think it was about 8 kilometers to the nearest town.
Mhm.
In the winter, that's a long walk. Like,
That's a
if you're
long
not,
walk, yeah.
if you don't got boots and proper winter clothing and stuff, maybe you don't risk it. But do you know how the cops found out about it? A cop was in a convenience store getting a snack, and a bunch of people like were wandering into the store. Because like that was what they found first when they were walking away from the train. He's like, "Where are you guys coming from?" "Oh, we're on the train that's stuck." What? 21 hours, I think they were stranded there.
That's
But
insane.
yes,
That's
Canada
fucking...
will.
And also because
launch stuff
over
into
and because
space.
like there was also a tree that fell on the track.
Yeah.
And nobody could get a chainsaw to it.
You know what? I don't know enough about the engineering specifics to know if it was unreasonable for the train to be stuck there. The people should not have been on the train. Like that
Couldn't
was
you just gotten like a buses and ATVs? Like
Yeah, that's exactly what should have happened. That
because
is
I just also don't understand how someone couldn't just get chainsaw.
Do you
If this shit
remember?
had happened in Alberta, these people would not have been stuck. We literally would have just like formed a posse of vigilantes and would have gotten them out ourselves. Like, I'm sorry, but that's what would have happened if this had gotten stuck in Alberta.
That is what happened in Ontario once anyone realized it was a thing. Like the local first responders took care of it, but
Yeah.
no one told them. Like there was no like, and this is why I have to research this more. It was like Via Rail was just sort of like, all right, we'll send another train, but it's going to take us like 18 hours to get it there. All you had to do was call the local fire department and they would have evacuated the train.
Oh, fuck
But,
fire
like-
department. I mean, like here in Alberta, it would have been like somebody would have called up all the moms on their groups list, and you would have had 20 volunteers there within 2 hours. Like that would have happened. I guarantee you that would have happened.
Yeah, I will defend the good people of Cobourg enough to say that I think if they knew it was happening, they
Fair enough.
probably
Yes.
would have. But
Yeah,
I think
there was no communication.
the train just disappeared into a Canadian federal bureaucracy void, and it was
Yes.
like no one knew it was sitting there with no food and no running toilets.
Crazy.
Um,
Just insane to me. No, I'm not trying to trash Cobourg or Ontario or whatever. Like I'm Alberta has a very unique civic infrastructure that is its own thing, but like I'm not saying that this wouldn't have happened. It just is completely insane to me. It's just completely insane to me.
Just remember my frequent warnings to you that Albertans are consistently saying only in Alberta, even though it's something that just happens
True, but like
everywhere.
remember only in Alberta that back when the train blockades happened, only literally Alberta
Immediately
showed up with their
dismantled
pickup trucks and just started dismantling it. Like Albertans are a bit weird. We are a bit weird. We generally don't trust the governments to fix problems.
I will say this: you're weirder than most of us, but you're not as weird as you think you are.
No, probably not.
Like you're like 10% above
10%.
baseline national
Weird.
weirdness,
Yeah.
but you think you're 300% above baseline national weirdness.
That is probably true. I will give you that.
Let
Anyway,
me
so
actually on the provincial front. Do you want me to actually give you guys props on something for a minute though?
Go for it.
Let me dump on my own province for a minute. I have 2 Ontario updates to provide.
Okay.
One of them, let's make briefly. 2 weeks ago in our welcome back dispatch, I made a point of putting, and I'm glad I did because now we look like geniuses. I made a point of saying 2 weeks ago when we came back from holiday that the Greenbelt file in Ontario was getting hot and that we should watch it. And oh boy. So let me tell you what happened. For the viewers, for the listeners, The Greenbelt is kind of a ring of land around Greater Toronto that was closed to development. A lot of good reasons for that: protecting watersheds, protecting agricultural land, and curbing urban sprawl. Over the years, there have been a bunch of adjustments to it. Because some of the times it would create like a planning absurdity where like a subdivision would be cut in half. So you would like put a few acres in, you'd put a few acres out. That was not controversial. Little adjustments were fine. There had been rumors in his first term that Doug Ford wanted to start selling off the Greenbelt. He denied it right up until the last election. Well, he's selling off big chunks of the Greenbelt, and he says it's necessary to develop housing. There's such an interesting political nuance here. This is unpopular on its merits. It's even unpopular with conservatives. Nobody likes this. This is like almost 70% of Ontarians oppose this, including 45% of conservatives. So this is not even like a partisan issue. Everybody hates this plan. What's really kicking this up a notch, though, is that it has been reported, and for all the lawyers out there representing the various parties, look how carefully I will phrase this, you soulless. It has been reported that developers with links to the government or members of the government purchased large parcels of land shortly before it was open to development. And since at the time of purchase, the value of the land was low, and since it is now open for development, the value of the land is high, it has been suggested that people with close links to the government stand to benefit from purchasing the land at the right time and now being able to either sell it or develop it. Those are the allegations that have been widely reported in the media. That is what we put a flag into 2 weeks ago. We basically said, watch this. This could get interesting. The Integrity Commissioner in Ontario is now open to probe into the relevant minister. The Integrity Commissioner cannot levy any criminal sanctions. They can find that provincial law was broken, and there could be a censure. There could be fines. This is not a criminal probe, but the Ontario Provincial Police is actively monitoring this. And as I wrote in a column for TVO this week, there's no good way to be investigated. There's just nothing but political agony when you're being investigated. Even if nothing is found, the opposition can spend the next 3 months going, Doug Ford's under investigation for breaking the law. They're going to just do that over and over. And that's the best case scenario. The other wild card here is, Jen, the developers are going to be investigated too, because this is not just going to look at the government. Everyone's going to want to know who had what appears to be, according to reports, unusually good foreknowledge of exactly what parcels of land to be buying. Doug Ford on Friday came out and said he does not believe that anyone was tipped off. I guess we'll see. So that's the update. We'll leave it at that. We're going to be very careful with this, Jen, because everybody's lawyered up by now. But that's the update on where the news story is. You and I have seen government scandals before. This is how they all start. This is exactly.
Yes, but then also let's remember we've come out of about 7-8 years of perpetual government scandals that ultimately the public didn't care about.
Oh, I know. And I used to have hair, but I don't anymore. The other thing I would say, and this is where I am actually going to laud the civic spirit of Alberta and provinces that are not Ontario. You want to know something about my own province that pisses me off?
Yes, always.
We had no idea that the rest of the country exists.
Oh, no, we noticed.
Yeah, I thought you might have. And I know people say it's center of the universe, Toronto. It's more of an Ontario thing. And so this week,
maybe the black hole's expanding.
Yeah, maybe. Earlier this week, sorry,
reaching critical mass, points of no return now as far as Thunder Bay.
Yeah, it's getting bad because on Monday, Doug Ford and Sylvia Jones, the Deputy Premier and the Health Minister, they announced some reforms to Ontario's healthcare system, which will allow more publicly funded but privately delivered healthcare procedures in Ontario. Relatively minor stuff. cataract surgeries, diagnostic tests, MRIs, CAT scans, colonoscopies, things like that.
I think we've been doing all of this stuff for ages in Alberta, and hip surgeries.
Knees and hips. That would be phase 3. And I read so much Ontario coverage. I listened to so much reaction, listening to talk radio while running errands, talking to friends and family, neighbors. Ontario had a provincial debate this week about something that is routine in every other province, or at least most of them.
Yep.
And it's
my mom got her cataracts done, or not a cataract, some kind of eye surgery done at a private clinic.
Did it ruin healthcare as we know it when that happened?
I'm pretty sure that our healthcare is in better shape than yours.
I am completely open to debating the merits of the plan, the pros and the cons. I have no faith in the Ford government's ability not to fuck this up. But there just needs to be, like, you know how Canadians are bad about any international comparison that is not the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Ontarians are bad at remembering there are other provinces in this country.
Yeah.
And all we need to do is go, hey, is Quebec doing this? Is Alberta or BC doing this? Like, what's worked? What hasn't? What can we learn from that? It just never occurs to us. We are completely inside our own belly buttons.
Yeah.
And
yeah. No, we rest of us had picked up on that.
You've noticed. Yeah.
We've noticed.
Think of the money we could save just by looking at what's working well in every other jurisdiction. And
but that would require that there are other jurisdictions that are doing things well that are not Ontario.
Yep.
Why would you want to look to some backwater province for ideas?
Because we're out of money and our hospitals are a disaster.
Well, then they must be worse elsewhere.
So that's my gut check moment for my home province. Just, I'm begging you, please remember there are other provinces. What can I make one comment on this though?
Okay, but quickly.
This is not as controversial as I thought.
Because you know what? There are other people on this podcast, Matt.
It's your turn next, but I will simply say, I thought this was going to be controversial, and I don't think it is.
No, I don't think most people. It would be controversial. The predictable people are going to be angry. But I mean, once people realize that this just means that they can get their eyes done sooner, they're not going to care.
Yeah, but I also just think, I think the taboo is broken a bit.
And it probably ought to have been.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't support a U.S. style private healthcare systems. I don't support
there is
that.
No, I mean, that's because there is no U.S. system. The U.S. system is just a bunch of cobbled together mess. There's no organized principle behind any of it.
Yep.
There's an attempt to sort of stick a bunch of fingers in a bunch of holes in a dam. Like that's all the U.S. system is. I think we can do better. No, wait, I don't. Never mind.
Well, we could, but everybody's focused on building a rocket launch facility. So
yeah, I mean, when all of your national attention and resources are going to an important project like that, how can you expect us to?
Which department got itself the plaque for the evacuation?
GAC. Global Affairs Canada.
All right, I want Global Affairs Canada to issue every Ontario health minister an award for excellence in administration and strategic planning.
I would like GAC to issue Doug Ford a plaque that says, "You've been great."
Yeah.
Congratulations for your heroic efforts in managing COVID.
And extremely well received and popular. Yeah. And then to the transport minister,
I think we should give Theresa Tam the Order of Canada. It'll be great.
For communication
skills during a time of crisis. Yeah.
Omar
Patty Adju for her extremely consistent. Jason Kenney for monuments and leadership.
Yeah, and stability.
And governmental management.
Yeah, we give one to the transportation minister for his heroic single-handed rescue of hundreds of stranded Via Rail passengers.
Perfect.
Yeah. The government of Canada.
We'll get a plaque and in it will be an image of the actual transportation minister hauling children over the snow. It'll be like a heritage moment. It'll be
just reaching with ropes
forever.
to pull the sled through the snow drifts. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's the Global Affairs Canada. The line item for plaques and ceremonial trinkets is going to be way higher than normal. Yeah. All right, you wanted to do some Alberta stuff.
Yeah, one of the two is that there was a really great scoop by the local CBC. Noted that someone within Premier Smith's staff appears to be trying to meddle with prosecutions, particularly on the Coutts blockade. You remember during the convoy that the Coutts blockade was one of the border crossings here in Alberta.
Mhm.
It was probably the most,
It was the
the most
serious one.
yeah, it was the serious one. It was the one where the RCMP allegedly found a conspiracy to commit violence, and when they raided houses, they found lots and lots of weapons, a weapons cache. Of course, this has become a subject of a local conspiracy theory where the RCMP actually set them up as a pretext to calling the Emergencies Act and all of the rest. That is not a credible conspiracy theory, and I'll move on from that point. However, it looks like somebody within Smith's office or next to somewhere within one of Smith's cabinets was emailing the prosecution saying, well, what are you doing? You're mischaracterizing this protest and blah, 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 blah. Obviously not on. I don't think it matches S&C levels because you don't have active threats of an actual prosecutor or attorney general to drop a charge. And obviously there's no monetary incentive to be doing any of that. So I don't think it's quite that level, but it's still government meddling in prosecutions. Meanwhile, you've got Danielle Smith was kind of called out because apparently one of her campaign promises was amnesty to some of the COVID preachers. But of course, she can't grant amnesty to the COVID preachers. That's not how the system works.
Premiers don't have pardon powers.
Yeah, we don't have pardon powers. So, a lot of her base are now pissed off because they feel like there's a big flip flop, right? Like they've had the wool pulled over their eyes. Hint, yes, you have, dumbasses. And meanwhile, so Smith kind of walked back a statement. She's like, oh, well, I've talked to prosecutors. And then she had to walk back the statement and say, no, I didn't talk to prosecutors, when it was pointed out that she can't really talk to prosecutors. That's really not appropriate. So anyway, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I was one of the many people who was very critical of what the Liberals did with the SNC file because, you should not have governments picking favorites on who gets prosecuted and who doesn't, period. This is just, we have an independent judiciary for a reason. And an independent system for a reason, independent judicial system for a reason. And you can't do this. So, don't do this. I don't know what else to say. To me, this reeks of just fanaticism and amateurishness, but it's exactly the kind of fanatical, amateurish fuck up that you would expect to see from this particular administration and that they really can't afford to have if they have any hopes of winning the next election.
So you and I talked a little bit about this earlier in the week, and I just ask you questions about Alberta because I always want to, I read the news for Alberta and I always want to gut check myself on it. One of the problems that I have diagnosed from afar, because I did briefly remember that Alberta exists and that other provinces exist.
I mean, whenever you call me, I'm hoping that you remember that, you are calling a number, an area code that is not.
Area code. I'm like, this isn't 416.
This isn't 416 or 647. What is this?
I every time I try to call you, I get a wrong number because I reflexively do 416 first. So I remember saying to you earlier in the week that Smith seems to just say stuff. And is this sort of
yes.
Whereas
yes.
Where, I've trained myself over the years, not with 100% success, to not verbalize every thought I have, because sometimes it's worth having that loop in the back of my mind that goes, actually, is this dumb? Or I don't know if the Premier of Alberta has that loop.
But I think the people like her for that. I think the people in Alberta like people who just voters, Albertans. I think people like that. I think they like it that there are people out here who just say stuff. I mean, this is kind of like 9/10 of my own popularity. I just say stuff.
It's also 9/10 of your problems.
Not wrong, but I seem to have turned out okay, and she's the premier of the province, so whatever.
With the prosecution thing, I'm not asking a leading question. I just don't know. Is there any link to Smith's office? Like, do we know who was calling?
Yeah, there's some suspicion. I don't think that the link is directly to Smith's office. I think it was like to an assistant of a cabinet minister kind of thing. So they didn't actually name the person and said this is the person who made the call. I don't know why they haven't named them. I should probably find out. Stop being lazy.
Because on the one hand, like in a sense of fairness, I want to basically point out not every political leader is responsible for all the dumb shit that happens in there.
And that would be impossible. And like, especially at the early stages of a tenure when everybody's just figuring out what the hell is going on.
Yeah, and I
Like,
think, like, for
right?
instance,
Like,
on the Greenbelt thing, I don't know if Doug Ford had the first fucking clue what was going on. Like, it's very possible that, and again, I don't mean this as a whitewash. For all I know, some mid-level staffer in the minister's
really,
office kind of went, "Hey, this is the map of what we're thinking."
or for all you know, somebody just accidentally faxed a map of the potential thing to some developer's office.
It would be a
Like,
fax too.
yeah, totally. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it could be something as stupid as that.
So I don't assume if there was any interference in prosecutions in Alberta that this has to go right to the top,
No.
but it does also seem like something you would need to have a pretty good set of cojones, basically, or to actually make that call. That
Well, and you
doesn't
would also
sound to me like rookie junior staffer.
no, it wasn't a rookie junior staffer, and also it kind of tells you the type of people who have been attracted to this particular government, right?
I don't know if it, yeah, I don't know if it tells us anything we didn't know. I'm
No.
just more stuck on like I think government staffers, I don't think are any different than any other large institution staffer. The people who are new in the job, the rookies, they're too terrified to do anything bold and assertive. So whoever did this had to be senior enough to probably delude themselves into thinking they were untouchable.
But it's possible this was a senior rookie. Is what I'm saying.
Oh no, yeah, no. I mean,
Yeah,
I would
that's what I'm
almost say
saying.
likely.
Likely. So this was
Yeah.
somebody in a senior position, well above where they probably ought to be. So you had the Dunning-Kruger kind of effect thing happening. Like,
Yeah.
I can understand how this happened.
Oh no, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think it's hard to figure that out.
I think, yeah, like senior enough to
Senior enough
think
to
you're
think that they were
invulnerable, dumb
invulnerable and
enough
that
to not realize you're not.
yeah.
A friend of mine used to be a hand-to-hand combat instructor for soldiers, which is sort of a weird thing to have on your resume, but that's actually, he wasn't in the military. He was just like a good hand-to-hand combat guy. He used to work with soldiers. And he always said when his class would graduate, he would always, like his entry-level basic class, his parting message to them all was, everybody, thank you for your hard work. Congratulations on all your accomplishments. And remember, you now know just enough to get yourself into serious trouble with someone who knows a little bit more. And
That's good.
And I think that's such a transferable lesson to so many other things in life. It's not exactly Dunning-Kruger, but it's pretty close to it, right? It's like,
yeah,
you now have earned just enough confidence to have too much confidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
we gotta let it go. There. I'm tired. I've had a bit of a morning.
I will do the Ontario updates, obviously. The Greenbelt one I will keep very neutral, as all of my comments were just reporting on newsworthy events. You're
going to do the Aaron Wary observations?
I'll do Aaron Wary. I will do Ontario Greenbelt, and I will do what was the other one? Oh, no, the Ontario not realizing other provinces exist.
Sure. Okay. Then I'll do the plaque. I'll do Alberta's Crown Prosecutor dust up. And do you want me to do something? Rockets? I mean, I'm just going to do a quick little blurb on Rockets. Like, I wasn't going to go into it at any depth, but
I just wish we could play Rocket Man.
Rocket Man.
I'm not. Well, if you want to write the plaque one, that's fine. But now I want to have a David Ayres reference in here, so the headline can be something like the Toronto Maple Leafs Award for Excellence in Governing. Like,
all right, I'll put David Ayres in there.
I wonder if we can use it. I wonder if there's like a art we could use too. To just basically, and the funny thing is too, everybody loved David Ayres. It was the Leafs that looked terrible, right? That's why the joke's not on the guy who was grabbed out of like obscurity for one night and shuts down.
Zamboni driver. The Zamboni driver served his role with honor and dignity.
It was the Maple Leafs offense that did not.
Yeah.
I wonder,
maybe the Maple Leafs offense threw it because they were like, we want to give old David.
No. I was there.
No.
It was just.
It was so beautiful. You're kind of tearing up.
It was just a magnificent collapse, and I was so appalled, but just so deeply honored to. I think do you know the if I say milkshake duck, do you know what that means?
Yes, I do.
I wonder now, because I never bothered learning anything about David Ayres. I wonder if he's a milkshake duck.
Who knows, man? It's almost don't find out.
You don't
want to find out.
Yeah.
So it's I feel like a little bit like this, like it's been such an honor to escape mainstream media and start this line with you in the face of the total collapse of everything we knew and loved.
Well, I mean, we didn't even mention it this week, but another round of cuts coming at Post Media.
Oh shoot, that's right. That's right. Another round of cuts. And they were just like they were great about it too. They were just like, we're gonna make a bunch of you go digital only, and we're not gonna tell you who, and 10% of the workforce is screwed, but we're not gonna tell you who.
I don't
Best of luck.
is see, I was National Post only, and I was management. So I never was involved in any of the union discussions. But is that because are the Alberta Post Media guys unionized?
No, there was a big infamous thing back in 99 where the Calgary Herald tried to unionize and they got busted. I don't think the Journal is, but the BC papers are. And this traditionally is why the cuts have always come from the profitable, increasingly profitable papers in Alberta in order to spare the unionized papers. Then that was something I saw firsthand because I joined the Herald several years after that strike. But it was really striking that the unionized papers managed to hold on to more of their staff and more of their resources for longer because it was just easier to go for the ununionized papers. It was easier to cut from them.
Yeah, because when you mentioned I am off the Post Media email distribution list. But I did read some of the coverage about the Post Media cuts, and obviously there was criticism of the paper, of the corporation announcing cuts, but not taking any questions and not giving any details about who is being affected. That's as reported.
Well, there's nothing better than just like not knowing if your job's hanging in the balance for weeks.
But what I was wondering is if that's because sometimes the company will say, we're cutting X number of workers, but then they need to go and talk to the union to figure out who those workers are.
Or it just gives an opportunity to, or it could just be an issue of like they're trying to encourage people to take voluntary separation agreements. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I asked if they were unionized, though, because if the union negotiations aren't a thing, and they're not a thing. Didn't they sell a bunch of real estate too? Where's
yes, the Herald? The Herald building. Oh, this is actually very sad. So the Herald building was originally built in 1982, I believe it was christened. And it's a huge, huge building. It's a lot like the old National Post Don Mills building.
Did it have its printing presses on site?
It did have its printing presses on site, and it actually even had like an atrium like the old National Post building did. So like clearly it was, I think actually the Post building may have been modeled after the Herald building. But that Herald building, I can tell you, was built with an expectation, and it was actually quite formidable. Not only did it have its own cafeteria, it had its own daycare on site where Herald employees could take their kids, right? Like that was really progressive space. And that building was built with an expectation that it was going to be eventually a newsroom of 600 and a city of 2 million. Womp, womp, womp.
What are you guys up to now? 1.4?
1.6, I think, was the latest. But
a newsroom of like 30.
Less now, I think less for everybody. And I think they outsourced their printing. And also they eventually moved everybody out of the newsroom, and the beautiful newsroom with this beautiful mountain views, they moved them into like the back of the building, into this teeny tiny little cupboard of a newsroom, and then they leased out a lot of their old space. I think they've been trying to sell that building for years and years and years because, of course, it was just this huge prime real estate asset that they were sitting on. So anyway, they finally sold it, and now they're going to have to find a new office for their, newsroom of like 5 people.
You want to know a really depressing factoid?
Mm-hmm.
You spent time in Toronto working for me directly. That would have been 2015-ish. When was that time you were in Toronto for a series of months?
It wasn't months. It was for a while I was an online comment editor.
You were in Toronto for an extended period of time and you were working out of the office. I just don't remember when that was.
But it wasn't months. It was really like a week or two.
No, it would have been more.
No, it was. It was not long.
Was it summer of 15?
I think it was later than that. It must have been later than that.
But by then, the National Post had already moved to the downtown newsroom in a
yes, this is the downtown newsroom. That's right.
And then, did you ever work out of the original?
No, I never worked out of the original Don Mills. I'd been there a couple of times, but I'd never worked out of there.
So the company, I don't remember how exactly this worked. Either they couldn't sell it for a long time, or they did sell it and then nothing happened to it for a long time. But I never have any reason to be up at the old National Post building anymore until an errand brought me to the strip mall that is next to it.
Mhm.
The old National Post building has been converted into an indoor self-storage facility.
That's depressing. Whoa. Well, in this case, the building got sold to U-Haul.
In Calgary?
Yeah.
What are they going to use it for? Like actual like fleet maintenance?
I have no idea, man. I mean, it's cavernous. It's a big building.
Oh,
Like
so is the Don Mills building.
Oh, it was huge. Like you could probably strip out all that. Once you stripped out all of the printing presses, you'd probably have room for like a fleet of vans in there for sure. And of course, they would have the big trucks because they had all the trucks doing the distribution.
Yeah. I just thought at the time it was a metaphor for, like, I started working at that building in 08, 09, and even then they were already telling me how empty it was. So the
Yeah.
building had 3 floors. The first floor was cafeteria, some boardrooms, and a lot of like utility spaces. So the first floor wasn't that useful for work purposes. Then there was the second floor, and then there was the third floor. And when I was there, the second floor was already like not only closed, but like shuttered off because it was depressing to look at the empty office space.
Yeah.
And then we had everybody on the third floor, and then we started to give up the third floor space and just shutter it off.
Yeah,
So
it's weird. It's like this. Once you've been in a newsroom in this scenario, it's like this weird opposite of cancer effect. It's like this slow retraction of the disease into itself, right? It gets very like, I went into the Herald, the new Herald newsroom after it had been taken out of the main newsroom and put into like the back. It was very sad.
when we moved from Don Mills into downtown Toronto. So for non-Toronto listeners, Don Mills is in North York. It's kind of a suburban area. That's where the original National Post building was.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we leased an off like part of a tower downtown. When we made the move, we had to have management meetings putting every available desk to use because the space was so tight that we had to make sure everybody had a desk. By the time I left, that building was 2/3 empty. So in 14, when we moved down, had to have detailed meetings about exactly where everybody would sit. By the time I left in 2020, half empty. So
take a seat.
Cheerful. All right. Do we want to say anything about this? Is this dispatch worthy in any way?
I mean, we have written about media stuff before. It's just, I'm not sure what there is to add.
It's another round of layoffs.
It's another round of layoffs. You and I have escaped. Wee.
Yeah. You know what?
And God bless our subscribers for that.
Well, I was going to say it feels good, but it doesn't. Because every time I hear about this, I just feel sad.
It's not good.
When
there's nothing good about any. It doesn't matter whether or not you like the outlet or not. There's nothing good about an outlet going down. That's one fewer voice. That's it.
I had this really cool memory of meeting Brian Mulrooney in the atrium of the old National Post building and waiting for a meeting. And he was just such a complete gentleman, and that rich, deep voice, like such a iconic voice, and asking me questions about me, my life, and just wishing me and my children all the best in that Mulrooney voice. And where I stood with Brian Mulrooney under the trees of the atrium, it's where people store their excess mattresses. Like,
perfect.
Yeah, like I said, it feels good to have escaped because
one day it's going to be an amazing sight of an Urbex video on YouTube.
What's Urbex?
Urban Explorer.
Oh, Explorers, yeah.
Yeah, Urban Explorers. In 20 years, no one's going to remember what it was, and they're going to be like, what was this place?
I'm going to go cheer myself up by watching something else about the Titanic. Okay, so, yeah, I don't know if I have anything to say about this. Is it worth noting? Like, even just as
I think, yeah, maybe we should just note it, but I don't know what else there is to add. It's just slow decline.
Do you want to do it because that's the Western Post media outlets?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, I'll do it. Post media cuts.
To our Post media friends, we love you and we're sorry.
Okay,
well, have a great weekend, Jen.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
Bye.